sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us more than strangers. On the outside, my life seemed normal. A house in a quiet suburb, smiles in family photos, neighbors who envied our perfect family. But behind our front door, everything was different. I grew up under constant control, fear, and guilt. This is the story of how I escaped the clutches of toxic parents and learned to live my own life. I spent my entire childhood in a suburb near Chicago. People around us only saw the picture: a neat house, a green lawn, a mother who always smiled at the neighbors, and a father who seemed strict but respectable. No one even guessed that inside that house, I lived like I was in a cage. My mother, Sarah, controlled literally everything. She decided what I should wear, who I should be friends with, what books I should read, and what I could watch on TV. "You're still little, you don't understand what's best for you," was her favorite phrase. My father, John, was even stricter. He rarely raised his voice, but his gaze was enough to silence me. If my mother pressured me with words, my father pressured me with his silence and expectation of unconditional obedience. For him, there were only two options: I obey or I am guilty. I remember once, when I was about 6, I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet. For any other child, it would have been a minor annoyance. But for me, it was a tragedy. My mother screamed as if I had broken something valuable and irreplaceable. "Look what you've done. You always ruin everything." These words stuck in my head forever. I cried, but not because I had stained the carpet, but because I felt that I myself was a mistake. In our family, there was no such thing as a mistake is an experience. Any mistake was seen as proof of my worthlessness. When I brought home a B instead of an A from school, I was met with looks of disappointment. My mother sighed, "You're letting us down." And my father said coldly, "No one feels sorry for losers in life." I grew up in an environment where love had to be earned. The toys I wanted rarely appeared at home. My mother always said, "Why do you need that? You won't play with it, it's just a waste of money." And my father added, "Real men don't mess around with nonsense." As a result, instead of toy cars and building sets, I had stacks of workbooks and books I didn't want to read. Even my friendships were controlled. When I became friends with a boy named Tom who lived next door, I thought I had finally found a real friend. But my mother said, "His parents aren't the right kind of people. He'll be a bad influence on you." I was forbidden to play with him, and I watched from the window as Tom rode his bike while I stayed inside, behind the curtains. As a child, I felt for the first time that the world was divided into two: the outside world, where everyone thought I had the perfect family, and the inside world, where I constantly lived in fear that my every move would turn out to be wrong. I didn't understand the term toxic parents yet, but even then, I knew that my opinion didn't matter, and that my life didn't belong to me. When I started school, the pressure only intensified. For most of my classmates, school was a place to learn, socialize, make friends, and sometimes even get into mischief. For me, it was a battlefield where I had to prove every day that I was worthy of my family. My mother would meet me at the door with notebooks and a pen. "Show me your diary," she would say instead of greeting me. If there was an A in it, she would nod silently, as if it were a matter of course. But if there was a B, the interrogation would begin at home. "Why not an A? Didn't you try hard enough? Do you want the neighbors to think we have a stupid son?" Those words stuck in my memory. I didn't even see joy in my victories, only the fear of falling a step lower. My father was even stricter. He would say, "You have to be the best. Not just good, the best." When I brought home an award for participating in a school competition, he didn't even look at it. "Participating? I don't care if you're not first. No one remembers the runners-up," he said coldly and walked away. At that moment, I realized that in his eyes, I would never be good enough. At school, I tried to be perfect, but inside I felt empty. I sat at my desk and looked at the other children. They laughed, drew pictures in the margins of their notebooks, and passed notes to each other. I envied their ease. I had no right to extra emotions. If the teacher complained that I was talking in class, it turned into a real trial at home. My mother yelled that I was disgracing the family. My father ordered me to stand in the corner and recite the rules of behavior. The hardest thing was that my parents deprived me of the right to choose. When my 4th grade teacher asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I honestly said, "A writer." I liked making up stories. I wrote them down in a notebook and dreamed of publishing a book one day. But that evening, when my mother heard about it, she laughed. "A writer? Are you crazy? You can't make a living doing that. People will laugh at you. You have to become a lawyer or a doctor. That's the only way to earn respect." My father picked up on her words. "We're not going to waste time and money on your nonsense. Remember, your dreams are not important. What's important is what will feed you." I sat at the table, silent, feeling something inside me die. My imagination, my stories, my childhood dreams, none of it mattered to anyone. At some point, I started to believe them. I looked at my notes and tore out the pages because I thought, "They're right. It's all useless." But somewhere deep inside, I still continued to dream, only now, secretly, hiding my thoughts from those closest to me. The pressure became a habit. When my teachers told me I was doing well, I wasn't happy. I thought, what will my parents say? Will it be enough? Even when I got the highest grade, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. I wasn't living for myself, I was living for their approval, which I never got anyway. Over time, I learned to put on a mask. To everyone around me, I was the model student, quiet, polite, diligent. But behind that mask was a child who was afraid of making any wrong move. In the evenings, I would lie in my room and stare at the ceiling, thinking, what if I never become what they want me to be? What then? And that's when, for the first time, a doubt arose in me. Maybe the problem wasn't with me, but with them. But I was still too young to realize it. When I became a teenager, I began to feel that the world outside our home lived by different rules. At school, my classmates talked about parties, their first crushs, and their plans for the future. I listened to them and felt like an outsider. My parents controlled every little thing. They checked my phone, dictated who I could text, and even set a bedtime for me. I began to feel suffocated by this control. And for the first time, I felt the urge to fight back. I remember my first rebellion. In high school, we had a school baseball game. All my classmates were going, and I wanted to go with them. But my mom said, "Sports are a waste of time. You have a biology test tomorrow." "Mom, it's only a couple of hours. Everyone's going. I want to go too." She interrupted sharply. "No." I said no. "You don't have to be like everyone else." I closed the door to my room, but inside I was boiling. That night, I couldn't take it anymore and secretly slipped out of the house. My heart was pounding as I made my way through the dark courtyard. For me, it was a real escape. When I arrived at the stadium, I felt free for the first time in a long time. The noise of the crowd, the laughter of the kids, the bright lights of the floodlights, it all felt so real, so alive. I realized that the world could be different. I sat in the stands and felt like I finally belonged to something bigger than my cage at home. But the joy was short-lived. When I returned, my parents were already waiting for me. My mother was screaming, her face red with anger. "Where have you been? Do you think you can fool me? You're disgracing us." My father was silent, but his silence was more frightening than any screams. He simply said, "You've let the family down. I can no longer count on you." Those words hit me harder than any punishment. At that moment, I realized that their love would always be conditional. I am not a son to them. I am a project that must fit their plans. From that day on, I began to lead a double life. At home, I remained an obedient child, studying, doing chores, reporting on my every move. But inside, I was looking for any cracks through which I could breathe freedom. I began to secretly write stories in a notebook and hid it under my mattress. I communicated with friends through secret accounts that my parents didn't know about. Every time they found something forbidden, there was a scandal. My mother would scream for hours that I was ruining my life, that no one would want to have anything to do with someone like me. My father would simply say, "You're weak. You'll never achieve anything." And the more they tried to break me, the stronger my desire to prove them wrong grew. But I was still a teenager, and I didn't have the courage to break free completely. I was afraid. Afraid of being left without a roof over my head, without support, without a future. At that time, I often thought, what if they're right? What if I really am worthless? But then I remembered that baseball game, the faces of my friends, the noise of the crowd, and I realized that somewhere out there was a life where I could be myself. That was my first real confrontation with them, and the first crack in their perfect scenario for my destiny. By the time I graduated from high school, the tension at home had become unbearable. My parents had long since decided for me. I had to go to a prestigious college, become a lawyer, and secure a decent future for myself. But the more they talked about it, the more I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to live my own life, not someone else's script. I secretly applied to colleges. Not the ones they had planned, but a regular community college in another city. I dreamed of going as far away as possible, at least a few hours' drive. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it in my hands and couldn't believe that this was a real chance for freedom. But my joy quickly turned to fear. How could I tell my parents? I made up my mind one evening at dinner. "I got in," I said quietly. "Of course you did," Mom smiled. "We applied to the University of Illinois." "No," I interrupted. "I got into a community college in another city. I want to try it on my own." Silence hung over the table. Then a real storm began. My mother shouted, "You've betrayed us. You've ruined everything we've worked for." My father looked coldly and said only one thing: "If you leave, you can never come back." Those words hit me hard, but I suddenly realized that I feared them less than I feared my lack of freedom. That night, I packed my things into an old backpack, a few t-shirts, my laptop, a notebook with my stories. I didn't take anything extra. At dawn, I left the house while my parents were still asleep. The first few weeks were hell. I rented a small room in a dormitory, ate cheap noodles, and worked evenings in a cafe to pay for my studies. I was desperately short of money and often sat in the dark because I couldn't pay for electricity. Sometimes I thought, maybe they were right. Maybe I can't do this. But along with fear, I felt something new: freedom. For the first time, I could decide for myself who to be friends with, what to read, what to dream about. I started writing again. I would sit in cafes at night after my shift and fill notebooks with stories that I had once been afraid to show anyone. No one yelled that it was stupid. No one forbade me. Yes, it was hard. Sometimes I sat alone in my room and cried from exhaustion. Sometimes I wanted to call home, but I remembered my father's words, "You don't have to come back." And then I gritted my teeth and said to myself, I have to endure. I chose this. And with each passing day, I became a little stronger. My first friends, my first job, my first victories, even if they were small, all of this was mine, real. I didn't know what awaited me next. But for the first time in my life, I felt that I was following my own path. Several years have passed since that morning when I left home with a single backpack. To be honest, I still remember the taste of fear when you step into the unknown and don't know if you have the strength to survive. But now, looking back, I realize it was the best step I ever took. Life did not become easy. I worked as a waiter, a loader, and sometimes even slept on friends' couches because I could not afford rent. But it was during these difficult times that I discovered who I really was. I learned to solve problems on my own and to pick myself up after falling down. Most importantly, I began to trust myself. I enrolled in evening classes at the university while continuing to write. At some point, my stories began to be published in small online magazines. I reread the first responses from readers 10 times, not because they were anything great, but because people finally saw and accepted what I had been hiding all my life. We didn't talk to my parents for a long time. Sometimes I wrote short letters to my mom, but there was no reply. It was only 3 years later that my father called me himself. His voice was harsh, but not as cold as before. He said, "I see you've made it." For him, it was almost an admission. For me, it was confirmation that I had done the right thing. I am no longer angry with them. They wanted the best for me, but they didn't know any better. Now I am free, not from them, but from their expectations. I can love them without obeying them. Today, I am sitting in a small rented apartment. There is a laptop on the table, next to a stack of notebooks. The city that has become my home glows in the window. I smile because I know that this is just the beginning. And if someone asks me, "Do you regret leaving?" I will answer, no. One chose myself. And that is the only decision I will never regret.